Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Creep Designs by Twitch. I am Twitch, your anxiety-ridden, coffee-drinking weirdo. Okay, anyway. So working on a small piece today, which is good because I've just had a week off with a cold. It wasn't too bad, but I listened to my body and just took the time off and stayed at home and yeah. So anyway, that's the culprit there, or the victim, whatever you want to call it. So this mirror belongs to my friend Paul, who is also my barista and plies me with caffeine. Much needed caffeine, nectar of the gods. So he wanted to do this mirror himself and then decided, hey, why don't I get Twitch to do it? So I'll be working on that for him today. So let's get started. Alright, so I forgot to hit record when I was cleaning, but you know the drill. I used Clean Cut to give it a good wipe down and then went over it with clean water and clean cloth. And then because it's so overcast and wet today, I didn't want to wait ages for it all to dry, so I've just used some paper towel to dry it off. Alright, so this mirror has these two, a hole on either side because it was on one of those pedestal things where it would swing, but it's not going back on the pedestal. I think it's getting hung or something, hung on the wall. I need to fill these holes. I could just pack them with Bondo and leave it overnight to dry, but I don't want to wait that long, and yeah, I prefer to avoid using Bondo where I can. So they are too big to use a piece of dowel in, dowel plugs. As you can see, there's too much room in there. I could pack it with skewers or toothpicks, but I held on to these handle offcuts from my paintbrushes, and I'm glad I did because they are slightly too big, but I'm going to whittle it down a bit with my chisel. I don't need to take a great deal off, but I'm just going to make it a bit smaller so that I can shove it in there with some glue and leave that for like 10-15 minutes to dry. Okay, so before I go any further, as you know, I'm going to be using some Would You Bend trim on this mirror. So this is one of the trims that I got for this piece. I stuffed up and thought it was a 2-pack. It's not, it's only a single pack. and I got some string and measured around the edge of the mirror. I was hoping it would be enough, but it's not. Have no fear. Putting that one aside, and I'll use that on something else. I had this one sitting around for ages unused. Absolutely beautiful trim, but I just couldn't work out what to use it on. But it had these two pieces of rope-like trim down the side of it, and basically what I've done is I've heated it up whilst unrolling it and sliced the side pieces off and heated it up and rolled it back up as I went, just to make it easier to handle, otherwise it was going to be one long strip. So this part will get put aside to be used on something else later, and these parts will be used on the mirror. That easy. Using wood bend is pretty straightforward. I'm just using wood glue to stick mine down and just heat it up as you go, and make sure you press it down firmly. I like to hit it with the heat gun as I go, just to keep drying that glue a little bit. It helps make it stick down a bit better. Adding on is also really easy, so don't be intimidated by it. Just make sure you cut off more than what you think you'll need, so you don't want to have to join it up in multiple places. But I just stick part of it down, push it down, cut the two ends together, so stack them up, cut them, and that way you get a nice join. If you do cut it too short, don't stress, because you can stretch wood bend a little bit. As you can see here, I did cut it a little bit too short, and I just heated it up, pulled it a little bit and stretched it out far enough to join up with the first piece. Alright, so if you run into this problem here, like I have, this is how I am fixing it. So this is a really easy fix. So I just hit it with the heat gun again to soften it. And then I'm just using a toothpick to get some glue under there. You could also use a small brush or whatever else you want to use. Now I'm using my Millie boutique primer and adhesive bond. The only reason I'm really using the primer on this piece is because I'm going to be using a decoupage paper, and the colours in the paper will stand out and pop more if I use a primer underneath. It doesn't have to be primer, you can also just use a white or light paint. I wasn't worried about getting the primer on the mirror itself because the plan was to scrape it off like this and just keep working the brush underneath to paint the back of the timber, that, you know what I mean, because I didn't want timber or messy paint to be seen in the reflection of the mirror. So I tried a couple of different techniques. The first was to just jab the brush underneath and then scrape it off the glass and do it that way, but that didn't work. I tried putting paper underneath and taping it, and that didn't work. I thought maybe forcing spray paint underneath would work, and it still didn't work. So I really didn't want to have to pull the mirror apart just in case I ended up breaking it because it's a customer's piece, but I couldn't really avoid it, so I ended up pulling it apart. When I pulled it apart, the mirror had some hot glue around the edges of it, so I've put it back in and done the same thing with some hot glue. I'd say it just keeps it in position and stops it from rattling around in the frame.
They love him so much to where his legacy, it overwhelms everything, but at the same time, you gotta know and understand when God takes you home, he takes you home, and that's where you are. You were there. You're at home.
So I'm sure you'll recognise this decoupage paper from Posh Chalk. I used it on a black set of drawers recently. I'm only going to be using sections of this, namely the floral sections. So I'm just going around with a small brush and some water and removing all of the outside parts of the picture. Okay, so in case you hadn't figured it out yet, this is going on here. He wants it so that there's kind of sections on, he wants it on the mirror frame, but also on the mirror. And his description of what he wanted was, he wants it so that you can see the flowers and you can see the pattern, and then you're like standing there looking at it and you're going, oh, what lovely flowers. And then, oh, there's also a mirror behind there. Love you, Paul. So that is what I'm working with, and that is what I'm going to give him. So as I mapped out and planned the placement of the flowers, once I was happy with where they were going to go, I did the same thing with the wet brush and just kind of traced around the edge of the flowers, tore that section, placed it back on the mirror, and then used the brush again to kind of cut it along the edge of the mirror. I think this part was the hardest part out of all of it, because I was trying to push it down into all of the little details and around the trim, and every time I put it down and then moved off to a different section to push it down into other parts, it kept wanting to pull up and away from the trim. So it was a bit of a struggle, but I think the best advice I can give for doing something like this is don't be afraid to tear it, and misting it as you go can help make the paper a bit more easier to handle and stretch and manipulate. Now that it's all down and dry, I'm just using some 400 grit sandpaper to sand all of the edges and anywhere else that's a bit rough or raised. For the parts on the mirror, I just went in with my glass scraper and scraped off all of the surrounding excess glue and top coat, and then went in with the same 400 grit sandpaper just to soften those edges a bit. Now I'm just using a small brush and some Cards & Millie Black Bear to add a little bit of a shadow line in between the mirror and the frame. As I said earlier, the paper kept wanting to lift away from the trim, so there was a little bit of pulling away as it dried, especially because it shrunk a little bit. So I just cut along that line and then just filling it in with some Black Bear. I had to alter one of my small brushes a little bit to get in there properly, but I think it worked well, and I think adding the darkness helped the trim stand out a bit better. Before I paint the frame with Cards & Millie Black Bear, I'm just shoving some paper underneath the gaps in the frame. By gaps in the frame, I mean where there's no paper, you know what I mean? Alright, so the frame is all lovely and black now, and I personally would probably leave it like that, but Paul wants it to look like this. Insert photo that he sent me. So this is a mirror or a photo frame. I think it's a mirror frame that he's got in his house currently, and he wants this frame to look like that, kind of. So I've done a black base on this. I'm going in with, where's the lid? Reedesign with Prima. And this is one of the decor waxes. I believe these come in tubes now. And I'm using the silver wax. I don't think it's called anything else. Shiny Star. There we go. Shiny Star. I have no idea if you can still get this. This was given to me. So I'm using that. And I'm using a stencil brush. I like to use these stencil brushes for waxing small detailed areas, or so that I can do some detail wax. Anyway, yeah, detail waxing in small areas. You get what I'm trying to say. So I'm gonna test that out and then see how that goes. Here is what it looked like before, with a little bit of a jig. And here she is now. It was a lot more complicated than what I was expecting, but I think I got it done. So let me know what you think in the comments. Keep your comments kind, because it's not going to be to everyone's taste, but it doesn't have to be because it's Paul's mirror. Also, don't forget to check the description for all of the products I used, as well as my Buy Me a Coffee link and my Amazon wishlist and all of that jazz. And he was absolutely over the moon with it, so happy, and was showing everyone in his cafe. And because Paul is so lovely, and because we love him so much, I also gave him the black matching drawers. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.